Flight 447 was supposed to be a routine journey from Chicago to London. The Boeing 707 carried 298 passengers and crew members, all settling in for the 8-hour transatlantic crossing. Captain Sarah Mitchell had flown this route countless times over her 15-year career. At 42, she was known for her calm demeanor and exceptional flying skills that had earned her respect throughout the aviation industry. The morning started like any other. Sarah completed her pre-flight checks with First Officer James Chen, a competent pilot who had been her co-pilot for 2 years. The weather was clear, and air traffic control had given them a smooth flight path. Passengers boarded without incident, many of them business travelers and tourists heading to Europe for the summer season. As the aircraft reached cruising altitude of 37,000 feet over the Atlantic Ocean, Sarah noticed something unusual. 3 passengers from different sections of the plane had gotten up simultaneously and were moving toward the front of the aircraft. Their movements were coordinated, deliberate. Her years of experience had taught her to notice patterns, and this was not normal passenger behavior. The flight attendants hadn't noticed yet, busy with their service preparations. Sarah watched through the cockpit door's small window as the 3 individuals continued their approach. They were dressed casually, blending in perfectly with other passengers, but their synchronized movement set off alarm bells in her mind. James was reviewing flight documents when Sarah quietly alerted him. "We might have a situation developing," she whispered, nodding toward the cabin. James looked up from his paperwork, immediately understanding the gravity in her voice. They had both received extensive security training and they knew the protocols. The lead figure among the 3 was a woman in her 30s with short brown hair, wearing jeans and a simple blue sweater. She looked completely ordinary, like thousands of other passengers they had transported over the years, but there was something in her posture, in the way she moved with purpose, that told Sarah this was no ordinary passenger. Behind her were 2 men, one tall and lanky, the other shorter with a muscular build. They maintained careful distances from each other, not appearing to travel together, yet their coordination was unmistakable to trained eyes. Sarah's heart rate increased slightly, but her hands remained steady on the controls. The woman reached the first-class section and paused, looking directly toward the cockpit door. For a brief moment, her eyes met Sarah's through the small window. There was no aggression in her gaze, no wild desperation that Sarah had been trained to expect in hijacking scenarios. Instead, there was something almost apologetic, as if she regretted what was about to happen. Sarah's mind raced through her options. The cockpit door was reinforced and locked, a security measure implemented after September 11th. But she knew that determined individuals could find ways around any security system. Her priority was the safety of everyone aboard, and she needed to assess the threat level quickly and accurately. The intercom system crackled to life, but it wasn't James speaking. Somehow, the woman had gained access to the aircraft's communication system. Her voice was clear and calm, without the hysteria or anger typically associated with air rage incidents or hijacking attempts. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is an important announcement. Please remain calm and return to your seats immediately. We are now in control of this aircraft." The words sent a chill through the cabin. Passengers began to murmur and look around nervously. Some reached for their phones, but the woman continued speaking before panic could fully set in. "I want to assure everyone that no one will be harmed if you follow instructions exactly. We are not terrorists, and this is not what you think it is. Captain Mitchell, we need to speak with you immediately." Sarah's blood ran cold. They knew her name. This was not a random act or crime of opportunity. These individuals had planned this carefully, and they had specific information about the flight and crew. She looked at James, who was already reaching for the emergency communication equipment to alert air traffic control. The woman's voice came through the intercom again, as if she could anticipate their every move. "Captain, please do not attempt to contact ground control just yet. We have something very important to show you, something that concerns the safety of everyone aboard this aircraft. What we're about to tell you will change everything you think you know about this flight." Sarah's training kicked in despite the unprecedented nature of the situation. She had never encountered hijackers who seemed so organized yet non-threatening. Her hand hovered over the transponder that would signal a hijacking to air traffic control. But something in the woman's voice made her pause. Through the reinforced cockpit door, she could hear passengers beginning to panic. Children were crying and adults were speaking in urgent, frightened whispers. But notably, there were no screams of terror or sounds of physical struggle. Whatever these three individuals were doing, they weren't using violence or intimidation tactics. James had put on his headset and was preparing to make an emergency call when the cockpit door's intercom buzzed. The woman's voice came through clearly as if she were standing right beside them. "Captain Mitchell, my name is Dr. Elena Vasquez. I'm a former NSA analyst, and the two men with me are Agent Tom Harrison from the FBI and Michael Santos, an explosive ordnance disposal specialist. We are not hijacking this aircraft in the traditional sense. We are trying to save it." Sarah and James exchanged bewildered looks. This was not following any script they had been trained for. Hijackers didn't introduce themselves with credentials, and they certainly didn't claim to be saving the flight they were taking over. "I understand this is confusing and frightening," Elena continued through the intercom, "but I need you to listen carefully. 3 weeks ago, our intelligence network intercepted communications about a planned attack on Flight 447. Not by us, but by others who placed a sophisticated explosive device somewhere on this aircraft before takeoff." The blood drained from Sarah's face. A bomb threat was every pilot's worst nightmare, but this scenario was beyond anything she could have imagined. James was frantically checking his instruments, looking for any sign of abnormal readings that might indicate an explosive device. "The device is designed to detonate when the aircraft descends below 25,000 feet, Elena's voice continued. "It's why we had to take control now, while we're at cruising altitude. We've been tracking this terrorist cell for months, and this was our only opportunity to intercept their plan." Sarah found her voice, speaking into the cockpit intercom. "If this is true, why didn't you contact the authorities before takeoff? Why take over my aircraft?" There was a pause before Elena responded. "Because the terrorist cell has infiltrated airport security and possibly law enforcement. We couldn't risk the information being leaked. Our only option was to board the flight and handle the situation from inside." James was now running diagnostic checks on all aircraft systems, searching for any anomalies that might indicate tampering. Sarah maintained control of the aircraft while processing this incredible information. If it was true, they were all in mortal danger. If it was false, she was dealing with extremely sophisticated and well-informed criminals. "Captain, I'm going to slide my identification under the cockpit door," Elena said. "Agent Harrison and Specialist Santos will do the same. I know this situation is unprecedented, but we need your cooperation to locate and disarm the device before we begin our descent into London." Sarah watched as 3 identification cards appeared under the door. She picked them up carefully, examining them while James continued his system checks. The IDs looked authentic, complete with official seals and photographs that matched the faces she had observed through the cabin. Elena's voice came through the intercom again, softer now, more personal. "Sarah, I know this is the hardest decision you'll ever have to make as a pilot, but I'm asking you to trust us. We have less than 4 hours before we're scheduled to begin descent. If we don't find and disarm that device, everyone on this aircraft will die." The cockpit fell silent except for the steady hum of the engines. Sarah looked at the identification cards again, then at James, who had stopped his diagnostic check and was waiting for her decision. Through the small window, she could see Elena standing calmly outside the cockpit door, her hands visible and empty. "Captain," Elena said quietly, "I have a daughter who's 8 years old. Agent Harrison has twin boys who are 6. We're not just trying to save the passengers and crew. We're trying to get home to our own families too." Sarah took a deep breath and made the decision that would define the rest of her career. She reached for the cockpit door lock, her hand trembling slightly as she prepared to either save 298 lives or make the biggest mistake of her life. The lock clicked open, and Elena stepped into the cockpit followed by the 2 men. Up close, Sarah could see the tension in their faces, the weight of responsibility they were carrying. These were not the faces of terrorists or criminals. These were people who looked as scared as she felt, but determined to see their mission through. "Thank you for trusting us," Elena said quietly. "Now let's find that bomb before it's too late." Elena moved with practiced efficiency, pulling a tablet device from her carry-on bag while Agent Harrison positioned himself at the cockpit door to monitor the cabin. Specialist Santos immediately began examining the aircraft's electronic systems, his trained eyes scanning for any signs of unauthorized modifications. "The explosive device is likely connected to the aircraft's altimeter system," Elena explained to Sarah and James. It's designed to arm when we reach cruising altitude and detonate, automatically when we descend below 25,000 feet. The terrorists wanted to make it look like a mechanical failure during approach. Sarah maintained her position at the controls, keeping the aircraft steady at 37,000 feet while processing this information. How do you know all this? And why should I believe you haven't planted something yourselves? Elena pulled up classified documents on her tablet, showing Sarah intercepted communications and surveillance photos. 3 weeks ago, our team intercepted encrypted messages between known terrorist operatives discussing the summer flight. They mentioned Flight 447 specifically, along with technical details about altitude-triggered devices. Agent Harrison spoke from his position by the door. The leader of this cell is a former aircraft mechanic named Viktor Petrov. He's been planning this attack for 2 years, recruiting people with access to airport maintenance areas. We've been tracking him, but he's always stayed one step ahead. James was reviewing the aircraft's maintenance logs on his computer system. There was routine maintenance done on this aircraft 2 days ago. Landing gear inspection and some electrical system checks. Could someone have planted something then? Santos looked up from the control panel he was examining. That would be the perfect opportunity. Maintenance crews have unrestricted access to all aircraft systems. A skilled mechanic could install a device in minutes and make it look like standard equipment. Elena studied the aircraft schematic on her tablet. Based on the intercepted communications, the device is most likely hidden in the cargo hold area, near the main electrical systems. It would need to be connected to both the altimeter and the aircraft's power supply to function. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. The cargo hold is pressurized but not accessible during flight. If there's really a bomb down there, we can't get to it without landing. That's exactly what the terrorists were counting on, Elena replied. They knew that once we discovered the device, we'd be trapped at altitude with no way to disarm it. But Santos has specialized training in aircraft-based explosive devices. There might be another way. Santos was tracing wiring diagrams on his own device, cross-referencing them with the aircraft's actual layout. If the device is connected to the altimeter system, there should be additional wiring that doesn't match the standard configuration. I might be able to detect it through the aircraft's diagnostic systems. Meanwhile, in the cabin behind them, passengers were growing increasingly restless. The flight attendants were doing their best to maintain calm, but people were demanding answers about what was happening. Some had noticed that their cell phones had no signal, which Elena had arranged by activating a signal jamming device to prevent any communication with potential accomplices on the ground. James was monitoring air traffic control communications, which were becoming more urgent as ground controllers noticed the aircraft's failure to respond to routine check-ins. We can't stay silent much longer, he told Elena. They'll scramble fighter jets if we don't respond soon. Elena nodded grimly. I know. We need to find that device quickly, or we'll have more problems than just a bomb. Once military aircraft are involved, our options become very limited. Agent Harrison received a message on his secure communication device. Bad news. Our intelligence network just intercepted another message. The terrorists know we're aboard the flight. They're accelerating their timeline. Sarah's blood ran cold. What does that mean? Elena's face grew pale as she read the message on Harrison's device. It means they have a backup detonation method. If we don't respond to their communications within the next hour, they'll trigger the device remotely. Santos looked up from his equipment with urgency in his voice. I found something. There's definitely additional wiring in the electrical system that doesn't match the aircraft specifications. It's running from the main power distribution center down toward the cargo hold. Sarah realized they were running out of time and options. Can you trace it to the actual device? I'm trying, but the aircraft systems weren't designed for this kind of diagnostic work. I need to physically access some of the wiring to get a better reading. Elena was studying the aircraft layout intensively. There's a maintenance access panel in the main cabin that connects to the same electrical system. If Santos can access it without alarming the passengers, he might be able to trace the unauthorized wiring to its source. Agent Harrison shook his head. The passengers are already suspicious and scared. If they see someone tampering with aircraft systems, it could cause a panic. Sarah looked at each of them, realizing the weight of command in this impossible situation. We need to tell the passengers something. They deserve to know what's happening, and we need their cooperation if Santos is going to access that maintenance panel. Elena met her eyes with understanding. You're right. But we have to be very careful about how we explain this. If we cause a panic, people could get hurt, and we'll lose any chance of disarming the device. The intercom crackled to life as Sarah prepared to address the passengers, knowing that her next words could either save 298 lives or doom them all. Sarah took a deep breath and activated the passenger address system. Her voice, trained to remain calm in all situations, carried throughout the cabin with steady authority. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Mitchell. I need your attention for a very important announcement. The 3 individuals who addressed you earlier are federal agents working to ensure our safety. We have received credible intelligence about a potential threat to this aircraft, and these agents are working with the flight crew to address the situation. The cabin fell silent except for the steady drone of the engines. Sarah could see through the cockpit door that passengers were straining to hear every word, their faces showing a mixture of fear and confusion. I want to assure you that we are not in immediate danger. However, we need your complete cooperation for the next hour while our specialists conduct a safety inspection of the aircraft systems. Please remain in your seats, keep the aisles clear, and follow all instructions from the flight attendants and federal agents. Elena nodded approvingly at Sarah's careful choice of words. She had managed to inform the passengers about the situation without using the word bomb or creating panic. Agent Harrison was already coordinating with the flight attendants, briefing them on what they needed to do. Santos gathered his equipment and prepared to enter the main cabin. I'll need about 30 minutes to access the maintenance panel and trace the wiring. If I can locate the device, I might be able to disarm it remotely through the aircraft's systems. As Santos left the cockpit, Elena showed Sarah the latest intelligence updates on her tablet. The terrorist cell has been monitoring air traffic control communications. They know something is wrong because we haven't been responding to routine check-ins. We estimate we have about 40 minutes before they trigger the backup detonation sequence. James was sweating despite the cool cockpit air. Can't we contact air traffic control and request emergency landing clearance? Get this aircraft on the ground as quickly as possible? Elena shook her head. Remember, the device is set to detonate below 25,000 feet. Even if we found the nearest airport and began emergency descent immediately, we'd trigger the bomb long before we could land safely. Sarah was running calculations in her head. What about depressurizing the aircraft and making a rapid descent? Could we get below the trigger altitude fast enough to minimize the explosion's impact? The device was designed by someone who understood aircraft operations, Elena explained. Even a rapid emergency descent would take several minutes to get below 25,000 feet. The explosion would destroy the aircraft regardless of how fast we descended. In the main cabin, Santos was working at the maintenance access panel, while flight attendants created a barrier around him using service carts. Passengers watched nervously as he removed panel covers and connected diagnostic equipment to the aircraft's wiring. Systems Agent Harrison received another secure message and immediately brought it to Elena. His face was grim as he handed her the device. The situation just got worse, Elena announced after reading the message. Our intelligence network has identified Viktor Petrov's location. He's at an airfield in Ireland with long-range radio equipment. If we divert to any airport within his transmission range, he can trigger the device manually. Sarah felt her heart sink. So we can't land in London and we can't divert to any nearby airports. What are our options? Elena was studying flight charts on her tablet, calculating distances and radio ranges. We need to fly beyond Petrov's transmission range before we can safely begin descent. That means continuing past London toward northern Scotland or even Iceland. James checked their fuel levels and did quick calculations. We have enough fuel to reach Iceland, but just barely. If we encounter headwinds or have to circle for landing clearance, we could run out of fuel. The irony of the situation was not lost on Sarah. They were trying to save the aircraft from a bomb by potentially running out of fuel, which would be just as deadly for everyone aboard. Santos's voice came through the intercom from the main cabin. I've located the unauthorized wiring. It's definitely connected to a device in the forward cargo hold, and it's more sophisticated than we initially thought. The device has multiple trigger mechanisms, altitude, timer, and remote detonation capability. Elena leaned forward intently. Can you disarm it from where you are? I'm trying to trace the control circuits now. Give me another 15 minutes. But Captain, you should know that this device is designed to detect tampering. If I make a mistake, it could trigger immediately. The weight of responsibility pressed down on Sarah like never before in her career. Every decision she made in the next few minutes could determine whether 298 people lived or died. She looked at Elena, who despite her calm exterior was clearly feeling the same pressure. Elena, I need you to be completely honest with me. What are the odds that Santos can successfully disarm this device? Elena met her gaze steadily. Based on his training and experience with similar devices, I'd estimate about 60% chance of success. But Captain, those are better odds than we'll have if we do nothing. Sarah nodded and made her decision. She turned to James and began plotting a course that would take them beyond Viktor Petrov's transmission range, buying Santos the time he needed to either save them all or die trying. Santos worked methodically at the maintenance panel, his hands steady despite the enormous pressure. Through his earpiece, he could hear Elena coordinating with intelligence agencies on the ground while Sarah plotted their new course toward Iceland. I've identified the main control circuit, Santos reported quietly. The device is more complex than anything I've seen before. It has 3 separate trigger mechanisms and they're all interconnected. If I disable one incorrectly, it automatically activates the others. In the cockpit, Elena was receiving updates from her intelligence team. The news wasn't encouraging. Viktor Petrov has moved his operation. Our satellites show he's now at a different location with more powerful transmission equipment. His range has increased significantly. Sarah felt her stomach drop. How significantly? He can now reach aircraft over most of the North Atlantic, including the Iceland flight path we were planning to take. James looked up from his navigation calculations, desperation creeping into his voice. Where can we go? We can't stay at altitude forever, and we can't land anywhere within his transmission range. Elena was frantically working with her team to find alternatives. There's one possibility. Greenland has a small airfield that might be outside his range, but it's at the extreme limit of our fuel capacity. Sarah studied the weather reports and fuel calculations. It's risky, but it might be our only option. How much time do we have before Santos needs to attempt the disarming procedure? Santos's voice came through the intercom, tense with concentration. I need another 20 minutes to map all the control circuits. But Captain, there's something else. I found evidence that this isn't the only device on the aircraft. The cockpit fell silent except for the engine noise. Elena's face went white as she processed this information. What do you mean, not the only device? Sarah asked. The wiring pattern suggests there's a secondary device probably in the rear cargo hold. This was designed as a redundant system. Even if I successfully disarm the primary device, the secondary one would still detonate during descent. Agent Harrison, who had been monitoring passenger behavior, brought more troubling news. We have another problem. Some passengers are getting suspicious about the long flight time and our failure to begin descent toward London. A few are demanding answers and becoming confrontational with the flight attendants. Sarah realized they were facing multiple crises simultaneously. How long before passengers realize we've changed course? They probably already suspect something, Elena replied. We've been flying for over 6 hours and we should have started our descent for London by now. In the main cabin, a passenger in business class had noticed the sun's position was wrong for their supposed flight path to London. He stood up and approached one of the flight attendants, demanding to speak with the captain about their actual destination. Flight attendant Jennifer Walsh tried to calm the passenger, but his concerns were spreading to others nearby. Soon several passengers were standing in the aisles, questioning why they hadn't begun their approach to Heathrow Airport. We need to address the passengers again, Elena advised Sarah. If they panic, it could interfere with Santos's work and make our situation even more dangerous. Sarah activated the passenger address system again, choosing her words carefully. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain with an update. Due to the security situation I mentioned earlier, we have been directed to alter our flight path for safety reasons. We are now proceeding to an alternative airport, where security personnel can safely address the threat. I know this is stressful and inconvenient, but your safety is our absolute priority. The announcement helped somewhat, but Sarah could see through the cockpit door that many passengers remained anxious and confused. Some were trying to use their phones, forgetting that Elena's jamming device was still blocking all signals. Santos provided another update from his position at the maintenance panel. I've mapped the primary device completely. It's a sophisticated piece of work, probably built by someone with military explosive training. The secondary device appears to be a simpler backup system, but it's connected to the same trigger mechanisms. Can you disarm both devices? Elena asked. I think so, but I'll need to work on them sequentially. The primary device first, then trace the wiring to the secondary device. The problem is that once I start the disarming process, I'll have about 10 minutes to complete both devices before the system detects tampering and triggers automatically. Sarah was calculating fuel consumption and distance to Greenland. They were literally flying on the edge of disaster, with barely enough fuel to reach the alternative airport and only minutes to spare. Before the bomb's backup systems would activate, Elena received one final message from her intelligence. Team that changed everything. Captain, our people have located Viktor Petrov again. He's mobilizing toward a position where he can transmit to aircraft over Greenland as well. The trap was closing around them. No matter where they flew, the terrorist could reach them with his remote detonation signal. Sarah realized they were running out of geography and time. Santos, she called through the intercom. How quickly can you attempt the disarming procedure? I can start right now if you give me the authorization. But Captain, I need you to understand that once I begin, there's no turning back. Either I succeed in disarming both devices or we all die in the attempt. Sarah looked at Elena, then at James, seeing her own determination reflected in their faces. After nearly 20 years of flying, she had never faced a decision like this, but she knew what she had to do. Sarah's voice was steady as she spoke into the intercom. Santos, you are authorized to begin the disarming procedure immediately. Do whatever you need to do to save this aircraft. In the main cabin, Santos took a deep breath and began the most dangerous 10 minutes of his career. His hands moved with practiced precision as he identified the first control circuit for the primary explosive device. Each wire he touched could either save 298 lives or end them all instantly. Elena was coordinating with ground control, finally breaking radio silence to request emergency landing clearance at the Greenland airfield. Air traffic control, this is Flight 447 declaring a security emergency. We require immediate clearance to land at Kangerlussuaq Airport in Greenland. The air traffic controller's voice crackled through the radio, confused and urgent. Flight 447, you are significantly off course from your filed flight plan to London. Please explain your emergency status. We have federal agents aboard dealing with a credible security threat. We cannot provide details over open channels, but we need emergency landing clearance immediately. James was monitoring their fuel levels, which were dropping dangerously low. We have maybe 30 minutes of fuel remaining at current consumption rates. If we encounter headwinds or have to circle for landing, we won't make it. Santos's voice came through the intercom, tense with concentration. Primary device control circuit identified. I'm cutting the altitude trigger wire now. In the cockpit, everyone held their breath. If Santos was wrong about the wire configuration, the device would detonate immediately. Seconds passed that felt like hours before Santos spoke again. Primary altitude trigger disabled successfully. Moving to the timer circuit now. Elena received another urgent message from her intelligence team. Petrov is on the move again. Our satellites show vehicles headed toward a transmission site that could reach aircraft over Greenland. Sarah realized they were in a race against time on multiple fronts. They needed Santos to disarm both devices before Petrov could get within transmission range, and they needed to land in Greenland before they ran out of fuel. Santos, how much more time do you need? She asked. I'm working on the remote detonation circuit now. This is the most complex part. Give me 3 more minutes for the primary device. Then I need to locate and disarm the secondary device. In the passenger cabin, people were beginning to panic as they realized the aircraft was flying far from any normal flight path. The sun's position confirmed they were heading northwest, not east toward London. Several passengers were demanding answers from the flight attendants, who were struggling to maintain order. Agent Harrison made a decision to address the passengers directly. He activated the cabin announcement system and spoke in a calm, authoritative voice. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Agent Harrison with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We are currently dealing with a credible threat to this aircraft that was discovered after takeoff. The flight crew and federal agents are working together to ensure everyone's safety. We will be landing at an alternative airport within the next 30 minutes. Please remain calm and stay in your seats. The announcement had a mixed effect. Some passengers felt reassured by the official explanation, while others became more frightened knowing they were actually in danger. Santos provided another update. Primary device successfully disarmed. All 3 trigger mechanisms neutralized. Beginning work on secondary device now. Elena felt a moment of relief, but she knew they weren't safe yet. How long for the secondary device? It's simpler than the primary, but I need to physically access the rear maintenance panel. The wiring runs the length of the aircraft. Sarah made a quick decision. Agent Harrison, escort Santos to the rear panel immediately. James, begin descent toward Greenland. We can't wait any longer. As the aircraft began its descent, Santos and Harrison moved quickly through the passenger cabin toward the rear maintenance panel. Passengers watched nervously as the federal agent and the specialist passed by, carrying electronic equipment and tools. At 30,000 feet, Sarah held her breath, waiting to see if the bomb would detonate as they crossed the altitude threshold. When nothing happened, she knew Santos had successfully disabled the primary device's altitude trigger. Secondary device located, Santos reported from the rear of the aircraft. Beginning disarming procedure now. Elena was monitoring communications with Viktor Petrov's location. Our intelligence team reports Petrov has reached his transmission site. He's attempting to activate the remote detonation signal now. Santos worked frantically at the rear maintenance panel, his hands moving quickly to disconnect the secondary device's control circuits. The aircraft continued its descent through 25,000 feet, then 20,000 feet with no explosion. At 15,000 feet, Santos's voice came through the intercom with pure relief. Both devices successfully disarmed. All explosive components neutralized. We are safe to continue normal landing procedures. The cockpit erupted in quiet celebration as Sarah and James realized they had actually survived the ordeal. Elena was already coordinating with ground authorities to arrest Viktor Petrov and his associates. As Flight 447 approached the Greenland airport, Sarah addressed the passengers one final time. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. The security threat has been successfully resolved, thanks to the brave work of federal agents and our specialist. We will be landing safely in Greenland, where transportation will be arranged to continue your journeys to London. The aircraft touched down at Kangerlussuaq Airport with just minutes of fuel remaining, completing one of the most extraordinary flights in aviation history. As Flight 447 taxied to the terminal at Kangerlussuaq Airport, Sarah finally allowed herself to breathe normally for the first time in hours. The ordeal was over, but she knew the aftermath was just beginning. Emergency vehicles surrounded the aircraft as it came to a stop, their red and blue lights flashing against the stark Greenland landscape. Elena was already coordinating with international law enforcement agencies through her secure communication device. Viktor Petrov and 3 accomplices have been arrested at the transmission site in Ireland. We also have teams moving to arrest the maintenance crew members who installed the devices in Chicago. Passengers began filing off the aircraft in an orderly fashion, many of them stopping to thank Sarah and the flight crew personally. Despite the fear and confusion they had experienced, most understood that the actions taken had saved their lives. James was completing the post-flight paperwork, documenting every detail of their extraordinary journey. Sarah, in 22 years of flying, I never imagined anything like this could happen. Your decision to trust Elena and her team saved everyone aboard. Sarah nodded, but she was already thinking about the investigation that would follow. Every action she had taken would be scrutinized by aviation authorities, law enforcement agencies, and her own airline. She had broken protocol by allowing unknown individuals to take control of her cockpit, but the results spoke for themselves. Agent Harrison was debriefing the passengers who had witnessed Santos working on the aircraft systems. Their testimonies would be crucial evidence in the prosecution of the terrorist cell. Many passengers expressed amazement at how calmly everyone had handled such an extreme situation. Santos was carefully packaging the disarmed explosive devices as evidence. Each component would be analyzed by forensic experts to trace their origins and identify other potential threats. These devices were incredibly sophisticated, he explained to Sarah. Whoever built them had extensive training in both explosives and aircraft systems. Elena joined them near the aircraft, looking exhausted but satisfied. The intelligence we gathered from this operation has already led to arrests in 4 different countries. This terrorist cell was planning similar attacks on other flights, but we've shut down their entire network. As they waited for replacement aircraft to transport the passengers to London, Sarah reflected on the events of the day. Her decision to trust Elena had been based purely on instinct and training, but it had proven to be correct. The alternative would have been catastrophic. Local authorities interviewed each passenger to document their experiences and gather evidence for the international investigation. The small Greenland airport had never handled such a complex international incident, but officials worked efficiently to process everyone while maintaining security protocols. Sarah found herself in a quiet moment with Elena as they watched the passengers being cared for by emergency personnel. "I keep thinking about that moment when I had to decide whether to trust you," Sarah said. "Everything in my training told me never to open that cockpit door." Elena smiled tiredly. "I knew it was an impossible situation to put you in, but I also knew that you were the kind of pilot who would make the right decision when lives were at stake. Your personnel file showed 15 years of excellent judgment under pressure. You researched me before the flight?" "We researched everyone aboard Flight 447 when we learned it was the target. We needed to know who we could trust if our plan required cooperation from the crew." James joined them, having completed all the necessary paperwork with aviation authorities. "The airline executives are flying in from Chicago to personally thank us and conduct their own investigation. They're calling it the most successful crisis management in company history." Santos approached the group, having finished securing all the evidence from the disarmed devices. "The forensic analysis is going to take weeks, but preliminary examination shows these devices were manufactured using components from at least 6 different countries. This was a truly international terrorist operation." 3 days later, Sarah found herself back in Chicago, sitting in a conference room filled with aviation officials, FBI investigators, and airline executives. She had spent hours recounting every detail of the flight, explaining each decision she had made and why she had made it. The FAA official leading the investigation looked up from his notes. "Captain Mitchell, your actions were highly irregular and violated several standard protocols. However, given the extraordinary circumstances and the successful outcome, the Aviation Safety Board has concluded that your decisions were justified and potentially saved 298 lives." Elena, who had been cleared to attend the debriefing, added her perspective. "Captain Mitchell's willingness to trust our team and cooperate with our mission was crucial to the operation's success. Without her leadership and calm decision-making, we would never have had the time needed to disarm both explosive devices." The airline's CEO stood up to address Sarah personally. "Captain Mitchell, on behalf of everyone at the airline and the families of the passengers and crew aboard Flight 447, I want to thank you for your exceptional service. Your actions reflect the highest standards of our profession." 6 months later, Sarah was awarded the Exceptional Service Medal by the International Air Transport Association, recognizing her role in preventing what could have been one of the worst terrorist attacks in aviation history. Elena, Agent Harrison, and Santos received similar commendations from their respective agencies. The terrorist network led by Viktor Petrov was completely dismantled, with arrests made in 12 countries. Intelligence gathered from the operation led to the prevention of several other planned attacks on international flights. Sarah returned to flying, but her experience aboard Flight 447 had changed her forever. She became an instructor for crisis management training, teaching other pilots how to make impossible decisions under extreme pressure. Her story became a case study in aviation schools worldwide, demonstrating how trust, teamwork, and courage could overcome even the most sophisticated terrorist plots. Elena left the NSA to become a private security consultant, specializing in aviation threats. She and Sarah remained close friends, occasionally meeting to discuss how their extraordinary day above the Atlantic had shaped both their careers and their understanding of what people could accomplish when they worked together against impossible odds. The passengers of Flight 447 formed a unique bond, many staying in contact years after their shared experience. They had witnessed something remarkable: the power of human cooperation and courage in the face of mortal danger. Their story became a reminder that even in the darkest moments, ordinary people could achieve extraordinary things when they trusted each other and worked toward a common goal. Flight 447 resumed its regular Chicago to London route, but it would forever be remembered as the flight where quick thinking, professional expertise, and human trust combined to defeat terrorism and saved 298 innocent lives, 37,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean.